Tonight, on these streets in the heart of Brooklyn, New York, the Boro Hasidic community has come together in celebration.
Their spiritual leader, their Rebbe, has lived to see the wedding of his great-granddaughter. When Hasidic survivors arrived in this country after World War II, America opened its doors to them.
Like most immigrants before them, it was taken for granted they would soon lose their Eastern European ways.
However, Hasidim refused to follow this script.
I noticed that the women always wear wigs and they wear long dresses. I noticed that.
It seems that they do have close families. They're very family-oriented, it seems.
Then I'm always struck by how many children the women are having.
I'm not a Chassid because I'm a woman, and I believe in egalitarianism.
They squeeze George Washington real tight. They really do. They good. I need somebody like that to save money for me.
They smell, they don't know how to dress, they all dress the same, they're ugly, they're mean, they push.
The kids do have respect in their own community, amongst their own people. When they go outside of that, they don't have respect. That's the way they are, with a goy, whatever they say.
Hasidim are a minority within a minority. They arouse controversy among other Jews, no less than among Gentiles. Who are the Hasidim? Why have they stubbornly refused to join America's mainstream?
Hasidim don't consider themselves American or Polish or anything else. They are living in America as they are living in Poland. They don't, for that matter, consider themselves Israelis. Their prime identity, to use Hasidic parlance, is avodas haBoro, which means the worship of the Lord.
Hasidim reject many things Americans take for granted. Television, movies, sports, pop music. Men and women are separated by distinct roles in many aspects of daily life. They don't send their kids to public schools or universities. Instead, Hasidim teach their children to live according to the Torah, the teachings contained in the 5 books of Moses.
The Hasidim came to America primarily in the 50s, at a time when the common wisdom was that you pretty much lost your particularistic cultural attributes after a brief period in America, which is what had happened to other Jewish immigrations.
Rich or poor, old or young, the Jews came to this land for the same reasons as the Swedes, the Irishmen, and the Italians, to fulfill a simple human dream, to live in freedom, peace, and prosperity, to work and to rear their children. The Jew, too, has blended into the American landscape. He is part of the music, the catchwords of his country and his century.
Merry Christmas, Paul. Happy Hanukkah, Jerry.
And the Hassidim didn't do that. They maintained their old-style Eastern European approach. And the fascinating question is, why did they succeed? How did they succeed? And I think there are two factors here. One was the tremendous strength of the Hasidic leaders that came over at that time, who said, darn it, we are going to recreate our societies here in America. And we don't care how funny it looks or how bizarre or how many people laugh at us or how difficult it's going to be in any way. We are going to recreate it right here in America.
Sag mal, ob ich komme das erste Mal von Amerika, ist gegangen auf der Gas mit der Strahl und Kaffee Freitag. Hat sich umgerufen dort ein Amerikaner hier, das ich kann verlangen, als die europäische Jiden kommen schon rüber, wir kommen Strahl und Kaffee, und mit 30 da rin, also das. Ich dachte, oh, hat mir der Rebbe mit Kalium macht Amerika. Der Rebbe hat noch das Kalium macht Amerika, aber ich will das Kalium machen.
Once, the story goes, the Torah scroll wouldn't fit into its new cover. Someone suggested they cut the Torah down to size. Ridiculous? Of course. It's the cover that must be altered. The Rebbes said, we will not modify the Torah to fit America. We will tailor America to fit the Torah.
I teach in a modern Orthodox high school. The modern Orthodox are vastly different than the Hasidim in that they live culturally in America. And I think I would become disheartened if it wouldn't be for the tremendous sustenance that Hasidic books and Rebbes and stories and teachings gives me. I don't think I have the strength to confront the victims of shopping mall America.
Oh, way to go, Will. Way to go, way to go, way to go, way to go.
I was born into a fairly typical Brooklyn 1950s Jewish milieu, which was vaguely culturally Jewish, but not religious in any sense of the term. We were Democrats politically and rooted for the Brooklyn Dodgers and celebrated Hanukkah and Pesach, and that was the extent of our Jewishness.
Sam, why don't you put the Hanukkah candles in the menorah for tonight?
I was just going to do that.
Susan, would you please help me in the kitchen?
Okay, Mom.
During my childhood, meaning haunted me. But there is something more to life than just a bourgeois pursuit of security. And finally, when my parents moved from Queens to Rockland County, and we lived in very close proximity to the Orthodox community of Muncie.
He walked over to New Square one day when he was 12 years old. It was before his bar mitzvah. He went with two friends of his. They walked into New Square.
We came back to public school the next day, and the whole class knew of our trip. And they're all crowding around. They're saying, what happened? What happened in New Square? What went on there in New Square? And my friend Paul was relating the story. And he got to that point where he says, you know, the door opened and the Rebbe came out. And one of the girls yells out, she says, well, what did he look like? What did he look like? And Paul just paused and he said, he looked like Moses coming down from the mountain.
He explained to me exactly how he felt and how he wanted to live his life. And when I realized that this was what he wanted, I accepted it. I, however, did tell him that if this is the way you choose to live your life, please don't try to influence Jay, who is my youngest son.
The previous Skvera Rebbe left a profound impression upon me. He was this saint who, when he would pray or study or whatever, you got a sense that he was elsewhere. And yet he could turn around the next minute and speak to somebody whose business had failed or whose wife couldn't conceive or any number of problems, and was willing to bring himself down to the lowest of levels to communicate with any human being. So that, to me, was basically what I had been looking for.
Well, good health.
Skver, Bobot, Satmar, Belz, Lubavitch. Even in America, Hasidim have kept the names of their towns and villages. They refuse to let the story of these places and those who lived in them fade from memory.
I can't believe that it's 50 years since we were liberated. And I say it's unbelievable how time flies.
Why was I the lucky one to live through and to see this? And my parents didn't see that. I told a German I'll give him everything that I have to, I'll give him one. Give him one arm, one leg, one eye to let him live. It didn't help, nothing. And you can understand how I feel by living through and raising 2-3 generations already that I see. And I hope to God to see more of them in good health with my wife for many, many years.
I was blessed that I am alive and I can see this. Maybe I did something good in my life. Maybe.
Hasidic survival depends upon each generation transmitting its story to the next. Today, Hani and Beryl's newborn son will be circumcised. Hani's mother looks on as her grandchild is given a Hebrew name, a name which will link the child to the generations which preceded it.
We named our new baby Shalom for my grandfather who passed away this year. When he came to America, he was sent by the previous Lubavitch Rebbe to start the school here.
He should just be able to live up to his name. He's stubborn. You have to be stubborn, you know? You have to be stubborn to be able to do things. He's going to be a great man.
Benzi! Go get to dir. Benzi an! Christi macht, bist du beim Schammes, beim Schammes.
The impact that my father had on me is still, even after the Holocaust, he still stayed a religious Hasidic Jew. There is a connection from father to grandfather, great-grandfather, great-grandfather, going to the past. We sing an old song from 150, 200 years ago. It's emotional and it's holy and it's beyond words.
Hasidim believe that God can be encountered within us and in all that is around us. The ultimate goal of the true Hasid, like the goal of all mystics, is to lose oneself in a transcendent state of cleaving to God, a state Hasidim call dvekus.
Shema Yisrael Adonai Eloheinu Adonai
Hasidism started as a spiritual revival movement which emphasized prayer, joy, and charity. The founder of Hasidism, the Baal Shem Tov, lived from 1700 to 1760. He was a man of the people who made spirituality accessible to everyone.
Scholarship was always considered as the avenue and the road to God. And in a way it excluded many people who lived in the countryside, who did not have an education. And here comes a man who changed, not that he changed the values, but sort of the scale. He changed the scale of the values. Instead, scholarship being number one, it was based more on a relationship between man and man, between man and God.
The Baal Shem Tov also rejected asceticism. He said everyday life could be sanctified, that God could be served through everything one did. Eating, working, raising children, even sex could become a spiritual act. The Baal Shem Tov taught that sadness creates a barrier between man and God, while gladness and joy open the gates of heaven.
Before the Hasidic movement came, Jewish religion was taught like a stick. You must do this. If not, God is going to punish you. The holy Baal Shem saw that a lot of Jews are leaving the religion because of this type of strictness. He taught us that you could do it with a galet, with a pat. Just the opposite.
Hasidism spread its teachings through storytelling, a means which everyone could understand.
It is Yom Kippur, the holiest day of the year. The Baal Shem Tov stops abruptly in the middle of a prayer. Time passes, and the congregation becomes uncomfortable. An illiterate young shepherd yearning to reach out to God pulls out his flute and plays a single heartfelt note. The congregants are stunned by this breach of decorum. Suddenly, the Baal Shem Tov resumes praying. Afterwards, he explains, I sensed the gates of heaven were closed to our prayers. That pure note sounded by the shepherd boy pierced through the heavenly gates. And only then were our prayers permitted to follow.
After the Baal Shem Tov's death, his disciples dispersed throughout Eastern Europe to spread their master's wisdom, stories, and parables. The emerging Hasidic movement was accused of heresy and was excommunicated by the recognized leader of Rabbinic Judaism, the Gaon of Vilna. The ban read, in part, everywhere they should be torn up by the roots. They should be scattered and driven far apart, so that not two of them should remain together. Despite the ban, Hasidism became the dominant form of Judaism in much of Eastern Europe. The movement was led by charismatic teachers known as Rebbes.
When a Chassid looks at his Rebbe, he sees the embodiment of the community. The Rebbe is the king, the collective representation, the flag. He's everything rolled up in one.
Every Chassid looks upon him as his own father, as his grandparents. You see a lot of times pushing, shoving it. You want to listen to him. We're like one. And he teaches the past and the Torah and most often the songs he makes, and he teaches us the songs and we sing. It's like everything that he does, we're crazy of it.
I do feel more lucky than someone else who may not be a chassid, and the reason for that is that we have a Rebbe. We have someone that we always look to and look up to. And everything in our life is based on what the Rebbe tells us to do. We don't take any major minor decision on our own without asking the Rebbe. And we know that the Rebbe cares for us, we know that the Rebbe loves us, and we know, of course, the wisdom of the Rebbe.
A Rebbe, hat auch a Rebbe. Jetzt weiß wer mein Rebbe ist? Der Gere. Alle Kinder sind sehr happy, als sie kennen sein der Rebbe? Ja! Ich will sein sehr, sehr erscheinen lassen. Ich bin der Größte der Gere, okay? Ja.
Also eigentlich darf man wissen, dass es auf vielen geht. Man darf holen, man darf sagen wie Jakob. So der Seides, der Tatas. Der Reib bestellt uns als Messias, als es lang geht. Dann müssen wir bedeuten.
Wer hat gesehen der Rebbe? Wer hat gehört der Rebbe? Kannst du sagen ein Wort, was du hast gehört von der Rebbe? The feeling at that age basically left with is the fatherly look. He likes us, he cares for us. Wieso hat, als man gehad, als größer Gast du, ist wenn wir davenen, hat man davenen eine Sache besser wie allemal noch, ja? Ja. Das Gedenken von lange Jahren, als du in Jagel Teure, hat es gehad, das Schier zu sehen, der Gere.
Hasidim believe that their Rebbe is in a constant state of dvekus, of closeness to God. For many Hasidim, such an elevated state is rarely, if ever, attained. But by being in the Rebbe's presence, each Hasid can also experience some of that dvekus. The bond between Hasidim and their Rebbe continues even after his death. Hasidim pray at their Rebbe's grave. They leave handwritten notes asking the Rebbe to intercede in heaven on their behalf.
With the breakup of the Soviet Union, Hasidim are now able to return to the resting places of their early leaders. Here, in Vishnitsia, Ukraine, the newly restored grave of the first Rebbe of Vishnitz is being prepared for a special pilgrimage. Today, the largest group of Hasidim since the Holocaust have returned to pray at this holy site.
Problema Rabina cá. Это проблема Rabina cá. Rabina cá.
Mas lá vem.
Estamos em Moraes.
After its first century of growth, Hasidism began to lose its hold, especially on the young. The lessons taught in Hasidic schools were seen as increasingly irrelevant to the poverty and anti-Semitism faced by Jews in Eastern Europe. Many young people transferred the spiritual zeal and idealism once invested in religion to their newfound worldviews: Zionism, socialism, and communism.
In the 1920s, the Soviet Union forced nearly all religious life underground. Synagogues were closed, and the parchment of the sacred scrolls was cut up and given to shoemakers to use as leather. In spite of escalating persecution, the Lubavitch Rebbe directed his emissaries, his shlichim, to organize an underground network of religious schools.
There were Hasidim who pleaded with him, let's leave, let's go to Poland, let's go to Palestine. And he said, no, our mission is to be here. God put us here for some reason, and that reason is to perpetuate Judaism in this place.
From the 1920s until today, the emissaries of the Rebbe's of Lubavitch have struggled to preserve Jewish religion and identity in the former Soviet Union. Today, Beryl Lazar and his wife Chani have come to Russia to train a new generation of shlichim. In 1929, the Lubavitch Rebbe traveled to the United States to raise funds for his underground schools. His American followers begged him to settle here. The Rebbe said, "America is not yet ready for Hasidism. Here," he said, "even rabbis have compromised and shaved their beards." The Rebbe returned to Eastern Europe, where he remained until the beginning of World War II.
For at least a century and a half, the corporate mind of East European Jewry was that America is a trefa de bedina. America is a place which is wild and woolly and open, and everybody does what he wants. There is no authority. There is no settled structure as has existed in Europe for many centuries. And therefore, the rabbinic intelligentsia refused to go. My cousin, the Munkacher Rebbe, thundered against America.
Shabbos Oktober, Teuses Vermeders, Shabbos sucht eine. So hat ich kein Digma. So gereicht meine Brüder in Amerika. So halten Shabbos, es gibt's an. Man meint die Shabbos mit den Damen, nichts tun im Shabbos, es kommt halten Shabbos.
In 1933, the year the Munkacher Rebbe scolded American Jews, the Nazi Party rose to power.
As late as even 1939, right before the war, the leading Rav in Lithuania, Chaim Gradzensky, wrote in a preface to one of his books, "We are in grave danger in our bodies here in Europe, but our souls are in graver danger in American materialism, freedom, license, etc."
For the Jews who remained in Eastern Europe, World War II brought complete devastation and the death of 6 million. Among the Hasidim, 4 out of 5 were killed. Hasidism's teaching that God could be found all around us faced its own test during the Holocaust. Some Hasidim continued to cling to a God who had seemingly abandoned them. Others could no longer do so.
Ay zaydim eilitzini at meyoid mitoyras khulaynati yesi ay yavay itoyras khulaynati yesi.
Before I went to the concentration camp, my mother packed for me something when they took me away from home, and she put in my siddur there. And that was my prayer book all through my 3 years in concentration camp. And some of the girls were laughing at me because they already got so bitter and disgusted with the whole life that they said, how can you do it? You know, like, they didn't believe at all. And I still went, even if they shut off the light at 10 o'clock at night, I went into the hallway where was a light bulb, and I said it standing up before I went to sleep. And that kept me going.
Back of my mind, I still am rebelling. Why this happens to us? When I say to us, I mean to the Jewish people. And so forth. And therefore, I was at one time pretty far removed from Hasidism, just the same as I was trying to remove myself from Judaism.
Das ist meine Mama. Das ist Schwester und Brüder Rachel und Moses. Moshe and Rachel.
After the war, my father forgot completely about Judaism. Take example, Shabbos. He completely forgot that the 7th day was Shabbos. That's how he said it. Was like natural. He just walked out of the concentration camp and no yam, nothing. He said I myself can't even understand how someone could completely forget, but looks like with such a pain, and from the Holocaust you could forget completely your past.
After the war, there was definitely a great pain and most of all anger. People felt that nobody knows who they are, from where they came, what their families were all about. And the anger, the only element which remained stable was God. And the anger was directed against God.
"150 years before the Holocaust, the Rebbe of Berdichev taught Hasidim that God could be found even in anger. The Rebbe of Berdichev asked a tailor how he sought God's forgiveness on Yom Kippur, the Day of Atonement. The tailor replied, "I told God, you wish me to repent of my sins, but I have committed only a few minor offenses. But you, O Lord, have committed grievous sins. You have taken away babies from their mothers, and mothers from their babies. Let's call it even. If you forgive me, I will forgive you." Said the Rebbe of Berdichev, Why did you let God off so easily? With that argument, you could have forced him to redeem all of Israel.
The first survivors arrived in New York Harbor on the Marine Flasher in 1946. Most refugees from Hasidic backgrounds had not resumed wearing their pre-war Hasidic clothes and were indistinguishable from other refugees. Many were still struggling with a post-Holocaust crisis of faith, uncertain whether or not to resume Hasidism in America.
When I came to this country and my wife started giving me, thank God, kids, and I started realizing, well, where am I going to go from here? What am I going to do with those kids? How am I going to bring them up? Am I bringing them up non-believers, atheists? It wouldn't help. Am I bringing them up as God forbid, converts? It wouldn't help, because Hitler took 2-3 generation converts and threw them into the gas chambers. And I bring them up as regular Americans, non-believers, or whatever. What is going to happen? I'm not going to take away so many generations before me with fathers and grandfathers and so forth and throw it out.
Among the survivors were a handful of Hasidic leaders, including the Rebbes of Kloisenberg, Skver, Satmar, and Bobov.
The Rebbe of Bobov went through the Holocaust, lost his wife, survived with a son, understood exactly the crisis of faith which people experienced.
En dat ik weet waar je gaat, dat mag ik uit de kent mama besproken, ganze besproken met hem, zijn taten en mama, en zij dat jeder aan gekend. Want man was zei waar ich bin, wann der Stamm und alle Sachen, also so wissen, dass ich bin von daheim jedes Kind, jedes Kind, und sah bei ihm, einfach zick werden, dass meine Eltern sind gewesen. Und gewesen wie Taten sind. Jeder gekommen, zerbrochen, ohne Families, mit Families, und sie haben gut gehabt, und der Rabbi hat sich gewiss besorgen mit Dires, Apartments, und auch die Jobs, verschiedenes. Und jeder hat Studier gemacht für jeden einen, hat einen sehr schweren Job, das aufzubringen, in so einem kleinen Saal zusammen in Amerika, Chassidisch.
Hasidim were much more fortunate than non-Hasidim. It offered for them a home. They could sit with the Rebbe and speak in Yiddish and tell the stories.
When I go to Brooklyn, as I do fairly often, I always think of the Mayflower, the Amish, I say to myself, these are the urban Puritans. They arrive with what is left alive of their Hasidim because it was no longer possible to live in Eastern Europe. Like the pilgrims arriving here in the early 1600s. They came not in search of the American dream, but in search of a place where they could do what they had always done in freedom and without being persecuted and without being murdered by Hitler.
And they begin to realize that if they're going to survive not just as individual people, but as a community and as a way of life, they have to create an enclave in which they can take from America, but not become swept up and swallowed by America. And that, I think, begins the essential culture war that is Hasidism and to some extent all Orthodox Judaism.
When the Satmar Rebbe came to America, he saw many empty synagogues and only a few religious schools. He said, "We will do exactly the opposite from these Americanized Jews. We will get by with small synagogues. Instead, we will build big schools with many children learning the Torah."
The adults protect them from the world outside, but they also look to those children for the fire. If the fire is still burning in the eyes and the hearts and the songs and the voices of the children, then you know the future is intact.
The children here in the yeshiva, most of them, are grandchildren of survivors from the concentration camps. They are a little bit different than my generation was. I'm a son of a camp survivor. We try to give our children much more attention, much more time. Some of us felt that our parents, the generation gap between them and us was 2 generations, not 1 generation. We are the first generation who are on the same wavelength as our children.
Tell we work 6 days a week. We all felt that our parents went through so much that we owed them to be good and to make them happy and never to cause them any aggravation. We always felt guilty. Always. Right, Malki?
What?
We always feel guilty.
Oh, very guilty. Very, very guilty when you have to say, I don't believe that way, or I want to do things different, or your children are getting married, and this is what you can't. You don't know how to say no. I can't say no to my father or my mother. You can't say no to
my
them.
children, to me, can say no. We can't say no to our parents.
But my father only speaks Yiddish to the children. Do you know why I'm alive today? Because I'm alive today because you had to be born. You had to be born, and the grandchildren in Eretz Yisrael, and the Irei Niklach that we have already, that is why I had to stay alive, and you have an achrayus now. You have a responsibility to continue the Yiddishkeit.
Pasach, Sofsa, Tairai, Chofchai.
When we start the alabase and we see a child who's having some difficulty with it, we think to ourselves, wow, what's going to be when we get further on, where he has to actually read? But let me tell you something. They all are able to do it. 3 years is an important date for a child. And we make what's called payers.
Payers? Ich gebe dir jetzt schnappen. Ich habe ein Haircut. Aber ja, Sie will schnaden? Kim, schnaden die auch. Kim, schnaden bis durch. Malta. Next to my golden machine. My mother. My mom. Oh, Schwingelabel. Schwingelabel. Mama, gaat schnaden voor de leg? Ja.
Michel. Das passt noch. Eine Buche. Ja, kennenlernen.
Also that day he'll put on for the first time usually a yarmulke. And also that tzitzis, the fringes, he'll put on under his shirt.
Tzitzis.
Our pleasure.
Hasidim believe when one embarks upon a holy quest, the forces of impurity do their utmost to interfere. The boy, who is about to begin his religious education, is wrapped in a prayer shawl to protect him from these forces.
He's brought to yeshiva, and for the first time, he's taught the alabase. Right. Ayin.
Ayin.
As the child says, the letterings of the alabase will take a candy off the letters. There's a tradition of showing a child the sweetness of learning. Siyin.
Siyin.
Tuf.
Tuf.
Suf.
Suf.
It's Aleph.
Aleph.
Mem.
Mem.
Suf.
Suf.
Oh, je zegt geen avoide ingele. Einmal so geen avoide ingele?
Ja.
Die kennst du doch also schön sagen, der Alabase?
The basic barrier the post-World War II Hasidic community had to overcome is to make a decision to deny its children and its grandchildren the great opportunities of America. Here they were in the feast of America, and they had to decide, we are not going to enjoy this feast, which is for the first time easily available to Jews. Remember, when you make a decision that your children and grandchildren are not going to go to college and university, you have made a decision that they are not going to be doctors, they are not going to be lawyers, they are not going to be MBAs from Harvard. You have decided that they are going to be poor, or at best middle class, with the exception of a few who might get rich in business.
Hasidim limit themselves to occupations which are consistent with their way of life. They do not accept jobs which require them to compromise their dress, beliefs, or rituals. Hasidim reject professional careers which demand university degrees.
Being Jewish in any serious sense is to believe in some absolute values, which are not yours to change. The basic premise of a university is relativism, is that we examine all values, they are all man-made ultimately, and they can be changed.
And the university for them is the height of impurity, because what does it do? First, it fills your mind with all kinds of heretic ideas. Secondly, it puts men and women in close contact with one another at just the point in life when their hormones are working.
In our society, we have two separate schools. We don't have co-ed, we have separate boys and girls schools.
It's very, very cold. Go upstairs, it's cold like this. Good morning, Kendall. The purpose of them coming to school is to prepare them for their roles ultimately as Jewish mothers. And the only way they can be prepared as Jewish mothers is if they get the proper Jewish education.
A Hasidic girl takes pride in becoming a mother and raising her family. She feels she's achieving something. Who says running Westinghouse is important? After 100 years, who's going to remember who ran Westinghouse, and who cares? Your children will be a legacy for your life, for forever.
Girls, as they grow up, these are our future mothers. They have a very, very important role to play. I could say more important than the future fathers. The mother is the one who instills everything which the child will remember all his years.
Good morning. Come. 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 Gonna wash your nail, and say, my Danny, come on, please. Sorry. My dad, Ani, Lefunecha, Melechai, Lekayam. And I feel my job is raising the kids, trying to teach them values and thanking God for everything. I had a lovely breakfast. I have to thank God for it. Even though I laid it out, He did it.
When a woman lights the Shabbos candles, it's written that she can request from God anything she would like. The heavens open up to her, and she has her own moment with God. She can ask for her children to be healthy, for her husband to be healthy, for her family to be healthy. When I was growing up, I would always hear people talking about, women's lib, and I never really understood that, because where I grew up, it was really never like that. And we say that the wisdom of a home is based on the woman. The woman is the foundation of her home.
Hasidic women are expected to find spiritual fulfillment primarily in motherhood. They are told this role is so important, it takes priority over public prayers and the study of Torah.
If women's role is really so important, why don't you have a mother to be the Rebbe? Why isn't she the one that you turn to when you really want to know what God wants? Why are they the ones who are hidden behind a curtain and pushed to the back of the synagogue? Well, we're told that the reason is because if men heard their voices, they might be distracted from their all-important prayers that God has commanded them to pray. Well, if I were God and I were looking for somebody to do my will, I wouldn't pick somebody who's so easily distracted that if he heard a woman's voice, he wouldn't be able to pray anymore. I'd pick the women.
The Hasidic world is hierarchical, deferential, which means that there are clearly assigned roles for all peoples in it. There are adults, there are children, there are men, there are women, there are rabbis, there are laymen. And people have roles. And there's none of this contemporary yearning, this contemporary agony over being in one role and really want to be someone else. You don't have children that want to be adults, or women that want to be men, or men that want to be women. So that it's a traditional society in that sense.
At the age of 15, I could not have vocalized it the way I do now. Something in me needed to leave. You wake up one morning and you just say, I have no choice. I have to do this. My initial education was focused very much on women's values. Because they give birth, their bodies are holy vessels. There's a lot of holy and spiritual responsibility for the girl, and so they start them young, but they really need to keep them on a very narrow path. And it's not necessarily all discipline. It is really beautiful at times, but I think for me it was very difficult to deal with that kind of boundaries. I couldn't, for example, run off, write a poem, and not worry about what's in the poem. So I felt like I had to censor myself. Everything I did, I'd have to look over both shoulders. I wanted to know what it felt like to be walking in the street and do whatever you want. Was it really this wild and crazy and unfocused existence? Was it really not spiritual? What is spiritual? So all of these questions that I had, they were, in a certain way, they were disallowed in a Beis Yaakov school and certainly in the Hasidic home environment.
Our schools now in Brooklyn all have school uniforms. Our uniforms must be 4 inches below the knee. The longest Catholic school uniforms are at least 5 inches above the knee. It's for tznius purposes. Tznius means modesty. It means you don't make people stare at you when you're in the street. You don't draw any attention to yourself, basically. That's what it is.
It's not to stress your beauty in the sense where physical beauty is not what comes first, inner beauty is. And I think that's a very beautiful value. But the way that they stress it is with outside concerns. We try to keep them separate from outside exposures which we feel are detrimental to the kedusha, the purity of their neshamos, of their souls. And in keeping with that, there is absolutely no outside media that comes into the home, especially the television.
I was watching TV when I was in the hospital, and I was amazed that a woman could sit home and watch TV all day and doesn't become mentally ill. At the end of the day, what are you saying like that? I was amazed.
We also have a beautiful library in our school, but at the same time we censor the books that our children read to make sure that they only read things that are in keeping with the lifestyle that we would like them to live. That's another way that they educate, by making negative what's out there and different than us. I can't live in this environment. I can't say I need to live this separated life. I am better. I can't put down others to move on. I was curious about the others.
If I were anywhere else and these are non-Jewish children or non-Orthodox Jewish children, I'm presuming that at least one of them would say, well, mister, what's going on? What are you doing? Or hello, or nothing like that. In fact, I said hello, and they sort of, hi. One young lady said hi, and the others pulled her back. And I said to myself, these are children. These are children that are going to grow up and be adults one day. And the perceptions that they have of me, or as a black man, or as a non-Jewish person, I'm not too sure. I don't know what to presume. they're being conditioned to think a certain way now. When they're older, when they're in their 20s, I mean, what is that going to mean? What's that going to mean as far as the community that they live in? Living in New York City, which is predominantly non-white. What's that going to mean when there's some sort of conflict or potential for conflict between Jewish and non-Jewish peoples, and there's going to be a need to communicate?
In fact, we were brought up to believe, boys, girls, everybody, that you really are the elite. You are the spiritual elite, and I felt very bad for the people who weren't born into the Hasidic lifestyle. You know, I had a certain compassion for them.
When Hasidim started moving into their enclaves, many of the long-time Jewish residents fled. This left Hasidim increasingly isolated among their new black and Latino neighbors.
Hasidim tend to live in close proximity to other minorities, be it Puerto Ricans, be it blacks, be it Caribbeans, and being Haitians. And there is no question that it is a great source for friction between the communities. Perhaps it will force Hasidism to look for other locations outside of the big cities.
They were going around the circle and they were singing, and I asked the gentleman exactly what was going on, and he told me about the ceremony before Yom Kippur. Then he said to me, "Are you married?" I said, "No, sir, I'm not." He said, "Well, are you in church? Do you go to church?" I said, "No, I do not." And he said, "We Jews, we love everybody. You know, we don't hate anybody. We're not violent people." What? I wasn't contesting that, but it's what he ended with what really kind of offended me. I had to laugh. He said, "We pray for you people too." And I laughed, because to me, what's implicit in that is that somehow we need prayers, and that somehow, oh, the poor black people, let's pray for them. We're from the sort of the position where we can bless them. It's very paternal, very patronizing, and I laughed, and he sort of patted me on the shoulder and walked away. And I said to myself, this man has no idea what he has just said to me. And I shake my head, because it's obvious that it's a cultural phenomenon that makes people react angrily. Not because they seclude themselves, but because they have an air of arrogance, spiritual arrogance, for lack of a better term.
Hasidim do not have the choice of moving when, quote, the neighborhood changes, because their institutions are in the neighborhood. Their Rebbe is in the neighborhood. They cannot move away as individuals. They can only move if the entire community or a branch of it moves and recreates its institutions.
Hasidim remain in neighborhoods where everyday interactions are often characterized by resentment and mutual suspicion. These tensions have led to political turf battles over the allocation of public housing and other government services.
These Hasidim say, look, we don't want to invite you to our house, and because we don't want to be invited to your house. Not because we have anything against you. We don't eat the same food. We don't have anything against you personally. We have things against you culturally. We don't want to share in your way of life. We view it as threatening and dangerous.
Hasidim are also threatened by Jews whose interpretation of Judaism differs from their own.
I don't have a rosy picture of the Hasidic community. I work in a hospital here in Manhattan as a chaplain, so I get called to different patients' rooms. And I see all Jews, and I see Christians as well, but Jews from all backgrounds. There was a young boy, about 7 years old, who came for a bone marrow transplant. And I knew his family was very observant, from a small Hasidic community in Israel. A few days later, the mother pulled me aside and she said that I wasn't allowed to go in and visit him anymore. And I said, why? And she said that her husband felt that it was not good for the child, too confusing. My skirts weren't long enough. I didn't cover my hair. They wouldn't let me be there in the only way that I know how to try to ease some of that pain.
In America, the relationship between love and marriage is such that you're first supposed to fall in love with someone, then you get married. For Hasidim, it's very different. First of all of their marriages are arranged. It's not only because that's different from America, but because love is, after all, a very disruptive element. Romantic love can be very disruptive. You can fall in love with anybody. God forbid, it's the wrong person.
The most important mitzvah we have is to get married and to have children. And basically, these are, at this point, my single boys. These are my single girls, and note that I have more boys than girls, despite what people think. And right after the date, the next morning, sometimes even that night, I just call up, are you home yet? Leave a message, she can call me the second you get home. How was it? What do you mean terrible? What's wrong? What do you mean she's not pretty? She's gorgeous. Yeah, I don't exactly lead them to the ceremony, but I basically feel that if they're the right age and the right environment, that they grew up similar and they have the right same ideals, it could be what's called a shidduch.
Well, the children rely on the parents mainly for shidduch. I mean, the main person that's in such a shidduch is the matchmaker. They call you up, they have a boy or they have a girl. In my case, I had the son.
I was looking only for money. Money, money, money. Because I wanted to sit and learn further. Without money, I knew you can't sit and learn. And I have to work. I won't be able to continue this type of life that I wanted. But my mother wasn't looking for money. My mother was looking for a nice girl, good heart. I don't care about a girl. Like, what I know about a girl. I thought I'm going to put her into, I'll sit and learn a whole year and she'll just give me supper.
And my son was a young child. This was his first date. Never spoke to a girl.
I couldn't even look into her. You looked this straight because as a Hasidic bocher, which means teenager, I sat and learned. I never even saw a girl, maybe my sister.
So der Rebbe hat gehört die ganze Meise, gesagt, als Masken gewesen, aber sie machen den Schidduch. Sicher, sehr zufrieden gewesen, sie geht die Bespuche sehr gut zu Bespuche, rabbunische Bespuche, Rabbune im größeren Land.
The next morning, I went into to the yeshiva, and I sat back into my Gemara and I forgot about everything. I left it up to my mother. She should take care of the wedding. My father take care of the clothing. I'm sitting and learning.
In Hashem, wir sehr scheine Hassene, in Hashem geboren geworden 4 Kinderlach ein.
Ach, Mazel tov, mazel tov, mazel tov.
A non-Hasidic parent has to tell the facts of life to his children or her children. Hasidim don't have to worry about that. There's somebody set aside who does that job right before the marital night. The young man is brought in. And the very thing that he has never been allowed to talk about, he's suddenly talking about, and he's talking about with a man who has a beard, who is obviously a pious Jew, and the man begins by saying, I'm going to tell you something that you've never talked about before, but don't worry, you're going to be all right. The first thing is, what I'm going to tell you, Abraham, our father, did it, Isaac did it, Jacob did it, your father did it, even the Rebbe did it.
Today, every Hasidic family is having 10, 12, 13, 14 kids. So you're having the largest size Hasidic families of all time, which creates tremendous economic problems for the community.
Most Hasidim prefer to earn their living within their enclaves. However, economic necessity compels many to venture into Manhattan. This has led to compromises and has allowed American culture to seep in. Despite their efforts to live apart in America, they have nevertheless become American Hasidim.
I had occasion to go to one of the electronics stores in Midtown Manhattan that was really run by Hasidim. But then I looked and I saw there's something wrong with this picture. There was a Satmar Chassid standing behind the counter, and he's talking to a customer who is a woman wearing a very immodest dress, her head uncovered, the kind of woman he would never talk to face within his world. And he's talking to her, and he says at the end, will that be cash or charge? She answers the question. He fills out the slip, he hands it to her, and says, take it to the cashier to pay, have a nice day. I thought to myself, have a nice day, this quintessential American expression. How could he say have a nice day? That is already being swallowed up by America. And I realized that that chassid, every time he goes to work and says, have a nice day to women who are immodestly dressed, he is in a way undermining that enclave culture, that culture war in which he is engaged in when he goes back home to Williamsburg.
Ich stelle mich durch die Television. Ich besuche noch einen heiligen Willen-Zerem von der Ruche-Dralte. Eines bin gekommen, ich wollte machen ein Picture von ihm. Ich sagte, ich will nicht machen ein Picture. Ich sagte, ich kann nicht von uns, ich mache ein Picture. Ich habe auch eine Gast, ich mache ein Leben davon. Oh, jeder war von uns, also hergestellt, jeder von uns, also jeder von Picture, ich habe ein Leben. Ich bin kein Mensch, ich kicke nicht in Television, ich halte nicht in Television, ich halte schon all die Sachen. Und ich will nicht sehen, dass in Television, also jeder von uns. Aber von uns, also... Sei gesund, kalt ist. Freilich Firmen. Bye, sei gesund.
My father-in-law went bankrupt, so I became a teacher. But somehow I just didn't like this job. So I went into the Boro Rebbe and I spoke to him. So the Boro Rebbe told me, he said these words, the world is big, go out, look for a business, a job, and do it with your whole heart and you'll be successful. I think I was in a doctor's office or something, there was an NYU bulletin, and I saw that fat bulletin has thousands of jobs, thousands. So somehow, I always loved antiques, and I saw the appraisal courses. I jumped to it. My first 2 years was very difficult. I was called to jobs, let's say to Annabelle, Staten Island, places where I never heard of and not Jewish. The whole week is very difficult for me to feel like a chassid. I'm so involved in business. The only time when I really feel like a chassid is Shabbos. Usually Friday I don't go to work already. I start preparing for the Shabbos. My girls come home from school 12 o'clock. And we go out shopping. Shabbos is here. We feel a special happiness coming.
Good Shabbos.
Good job.
Before the Hasidim came to America, they could see no way of serving God in this Trefena Medina, in this impure land.
Once here, Hasidim resisted becoming assimilated into the culture of America.
But after 50 years, they have discovered it is indeed possible to be a Hasid, even in America.
The people who were born overseas, especially the Holocaust survivors who came to America, Hasidic Holocaust survivors, have a great appreciation of America. And they compare the American government to the governments of oppression who discriminated so much against Jews. Those who were born here don't know any other kind of an experience and take it for granted.
My children went to Yeshiva University and colleges, and they were brought up not wearing red beards and in the strammers and things like that. And then when my oldest son got married, he decided to wear the whole getup. And I was not very happy about it because it reminded me of Poland. It reminded me of my father when he walked down the street, how people were jeering, how people were throwing stones, and I, as a child, a young girl of 8, 9, felt very hurt and sorry for my father. And I didn't even realize that when you're born in America, you are free. You don't have that feeling of being afraid. And he decided, no, that's what I want to be, and that's how I want to conduct my life, and inside and outside.
As far as the dress, my father never wanted to go all the way in adopting it. For some reason, he came to America and he didn't have money, my father. So he took on this way of life that he has now, some more of a modern outlook. But on the other hand, inside, he's really a chassid at heart. And he really sits here and enjoys seeing his einiklach, with long payas, because really, deep down, he wants to be like that. But he's already outgrown it. He really can't go back to it. Although I want to predict at this point that in Vietnam, in another 10 years, he'll grow a long white beard and he'll put on a bekisha and he'll look just like all the rest of us.
The Rebbe asked his Hasidim, "Where is the dwelling of God?" "What a thing to ask," one of them replied. "Isn't the whole earth filled with his glory?" The Rebbe answered, "God dwells wherever man lets him in."
Hasidim believe that God dwells in all that exists. Therefore, everything can be used to serve him. They discovered that even American media, which they exclude from their homes, can be used for a higher spiritual purpose. Lubavitch, the Hasidic group most open to innovation, has even found ways of using television to attract more Jews to religious life.
And the Rebbe said anything that was created in the world should be used to bring out the message. Let it be television, let it be radio, let it be a newspaper.
Even if we can't get it in, we need a setup shot. Get a good shot, get a good shot. We didn't have it last year. Last year we used something from a tape piece, then we need a setup shot. Preview, camera, whatever, they're going to Moscow next. We want to have
every time we want to establish a wide shot.
Then you should tell her, we want first a wide shot from camera number.
Exactly, but I don't want to tell her that every time.
Right.
I want to set that up now. Does she speak English?
Good English.
No problem with that.
Ну как народ? Вот там метро, вот метро. Зеленый домик, там уже метро.
We're going to have a live link between 5 major capitals in the world, each one lighting its own Hanukkah menorah, and by this uniting Jews from all over the world in one big Hanukkah celebration.
И две камеры, значит, одна сбоку и вторая сбоку. Две камеры оттуда работают.
Of course, all these details who we weren't taught about in yeshiva, of satellites and transporters and all this kind of new modern technology. The Red Square and the Kremlin were known to be the place where all the anti-religion and anti-God thoughts came from. People were used to not telling even their neighbors that they were Jewish, crossing off their documents the word Ivrei, which means Jewish. By lighting a menorah in the street, we are proclaiming, look, you have to be proud and happy to be a Jew, and you can rejoice being a Jew even in the streets. We're trying to get the Russian army band to come play some Jewish songs for us.
Да, слышно. А меня слышно? Володя Полухин, ответь, пожалуйста. Please be patient 1 second.
Полный здоровья, Ребе! Сразу сейчас, сегодня! אשר קידשנו במצוותיו וציוונו להדליק נר חנוכו.
To New York, they said they got everything, beautiful pictures, and everything was perfect.
The Hasidim gain something in this world. Their values are secure. Their role models are secure. The Rebbe, the living Rebbe, is their role model. Their community is secure. Their extended family exists for them. All of the things which are now questionable in America. We're all looking for role models, for values, for meaning. That's the great word in America. All of this exists for the Hasidim. In return for this, they live a life within very strict boundaries, and they do not participate in the great American race for success. But at this moment, the great American race for success seems to be a race that not many people, or certainly not most people, can win.
Nice pass, nice pass. I'll very often say to my students that although they may find it hard to believe, that would I be given the choice of being the coolest athlete in the most popular co-ed school in the yeshiva circuit, on the one hand, and being able to spend a Shabbos in Skver together with the Rebbe in a serious Hasidic atmosphere, I would take the latter. And I think that that's hard for them to understand because their spiritual antenna have been cut by modernity. So basically, I'm trying to repair that antenna apparatus so that they can feel what it means and understand what it means to live a life of meaning.
While I could have had a wonderful lifestyle, I needed to be doing something a bit more out there, and maybe even out there in this world. I mean, I'm a writer, and I'm now at school and studying European studies. I like to travel back and forth to Europe. I like that freedom. I like the ability to talk to both men and women without having that be a problem. I go back to Boro Park regularly. I have a relationship with my family. I don't have a hard time going to Boro Park. I have a hard time bringing the whole self there. It doesn't make sense, which is why I left it in the first place. What I realize I'm missing is this sense of enlightenment, this sense of definitive, I know what I'm doing spiritually and I'm correct. I don't know if I need to look for that elsewhere. I don't know if I need to look for that period, but it is something that I see in people, the way that they walk, the way that they talk, the way that they have this community. And I do miss that. I miss that sense of community. I miss that security that people have in each other.
Einer, was dich Jid meint, als zu sein Jid ist eine schwere Sache. Man sagt, es ist schwer zu sein Jid. Ich habe viel verkehrt, es ist schwer zu sein Goy. Wie kann sein Jid, gibt der Hand auf der Nacht, ihn zu trinken, dann geht nach Hause, mit singen, mit zu freilich machen. Welcher Goy hat das Tag in seinem Leben? Kann ich ja. Jid, ich sehe Schabes auf einem Tisch, mit meinen Kindern, in der Vier an Tisch. Ich glaube nicht, dass der größte Präsident hat das nur Rochni ist, wie ich auch.
No, laten we dansen. Mensen, ik ben zakan, ik ga vragen, schrijf af. We gaan even. Ik ben zakan, in nationaal, nationaal. Ik ben zakan, nationaal, nationaal. Ik ben zakan, ik ben zakan,
To my father, every grandchild that's born, it's like a stoch to the Germans. We get together once a year, the whole family. That was Hanukkah. I mean, you have to come with earplugs because so much babies crying. It's like so much noise. But for my father, it's to him the biggest pleasure. It's just to see 72 grandchildren, and all of them have the names of his family. Mother, father, grandfather, we all gave the name. It's like, you know, seeing his family again.
And I think there are two factors here. One was the tremendous strength of the Hasidic leaders that came over at that time, who said, darn it, we are going to recreate our societies here in America. And we don't care how funny it looks or how bizarre or how many people laugh at us or how difficult it's going to be in any way. We are going to recreate it right here in America.
Sag mal, ich komme das erste Mal von Amerika. Ist gegangen auf der Gas, mit der Stramm und Kaffee Freitag. Hat sich umgerufen dort ein Amerikaner hier, das ich kann verlangen, als die europäische Jiden kommen schon rüber, wir kommen Stramm und Kaffee, und mit 30 da rein, also das. Sagt oi, hat mir da der Rebbe mit Kalium nach Amerika. Der Rebbe hat noch das Kalium gemacht Amerika, aber ich will das Kalium machen.
Once, the story goes, the Torah scroll wouldn't fit into its new cover. Someone suggested they cut the Torah down to size. Ridiculous? Of course. It's the cover that must be altered. The Rebbes said, we will not modify the Torah to fit America. We will tailor America to fit the Torah.
I teach in a modern Orthodox high school. The modern Orthodox are vastly different than the Hassidim in that they live
Tonight, on these streets in the heart of Brooklyn, New York, the Boro Hasidic community has come together in celebration.
Their spiritual leader, their Rebbe, has lived to see the wedding of his great-granddaughter. When Hasidic survivors arrived in this country after World War II, America opened its doors to them.
Like most immigrants before them, it was taken for granted they would soon lose their Eastern European ways.
However, Hassidim refused to follow this script.
I noticed that the women always wear wigs and they wear long dresses. I noticed that.
It seems that they do have close families. They're very family-orientated, it seems.
Then I'm always struck by how many children the women are having.
I'm not a chassid because I'm a woman, and I believe in egalitarianism.
They squeeze George Washington real tight. They really do. They good. I need somebody like that to save money for me.
They smell, they don't know how to dress, they all dress the same, they're ugly, they're mean, they push.
The kids do have respect in their own community amongst their own people. When they go outside of that, they don't have respect. That's the way they are, with a goy, whatever they say.
Hasidim are a minority within a minority. They arouse controversy among other Jews, no less than among Gentiles. Who are the Hasidim? Why have they stubbornly refused to join America's mainstream?
Hassidim don't consider themselves American or Polish or anything else. They are living in America as they are living in Poland. They don't, for that matter, consider themselves Israelis. Their prime identity, to use Hasidic parlance, is avodas haBoro, which means the worship of the Lord.
Hasidim reject many things Americans take for granted. Television, movies, sports, pop music. Men and women are separated by distinct roles in many aspects of daily life. They don't send their kids to public schools or universities. Instead, Hasidim teach their children to live according to the Torah, the teachings contained in the 5 books of Moses.
The Hasidim came to America primarily in the 50s, at a time when the common wisdom was that you pretty much lost your particularistic cultural attributes after a brief period in America, which is what had happened to other Jewish immigrations.
Rich or poor, old or young, the Jews came to this land for the same reasons as the Swedes, the Irishmen, and the Italians, to fulfill a simple human dream, to live in freedom, peace, and prosperity, to work and to rear their children. The Jew, too, has blended into the American landscape. He is part of the music, the catchwords of his country and his century.
Merry Christmas, Paul. Happy Hanukkah, Jerry.
And the Chassidim didn't do that. They maintained their old-style Eastern European approach. And the fascinating question is, why did they succeed? How did they succeed? Culturally, in America. And I think I would become disheartened if it wouldn't be for the tremendous sustenance that Hasidic books and rebbes and stories and teachings gives me. I don't think I have the strength to confront the victims of shopping mall America.
Oh, way to go, Will. Way to go, way to go, way to go, way to go.
I was born into a fairly typical Brooklyn 1950s Jewish milieu, which was vaguely culturally Jewish, but not religious in any sense of the term. We were Democrats politically and rooted for the Brooklyn Dodgers and celebrated Hanukkah and Pesach, and that was the extent of our Jewishness.
Sam, why don't you put the Hanukkah candles in the menorah for tonight?
I was just going to do that.
Susan, would you please help me in the kitchen?
Okay, Mom.
During my childhood, meaning haunted me. That there is something more to life than just a bourgeois pursuit of security. And finally, when my parents moved from Queens to Rockland County, and we lived in very close proximity to the Orthodox community of Muncie.
He walked over to New Square one day when he was 12 years old. It was before his bar mitzvah. He went with 2 friends of his. They walked into New Square.
We came back to public school the next day, and the whole class knew of our trip. And they're all crowding around. They're saying, what happened? What happened in New Square? What went on there in New Square? And my friend Paul was relating the story, and he got to that point where he says, you know, the door opened, and the Rebbe came out. And one of the girls yells out, she says, well, what